Ooh, a new background today. Yes, I'm recording in my office, believe it or not. Let me start off by sharing with you a couple of my pet peeves so you can see whether or not you're as crazy as I am. I'll start off with an easy one because I know we probably pretty much all agree on this. I hate it when people leave one little piece of toilet paper on the roll and don't bother changing it, or at the very least just bringing in a backup roll that is ready to go. What am I supposed to do with one little square of toilet paper? I mean, you would have to have the skill of a brain surgeon to be able to complete that procedure without any complications. You know what I mean? Yeah. If you don't have the pet peeve of an empty toilet paper roll, then guess what? You're the reason that the rest of us have this pet peeve. I mean, seriously, this is not the Walmart bathroom. Nobody gets paid to swap out the TP in your house. So how about contributing every once in a while? That would be pretty great. Another pet peeve of mine is I hate it when people message me asking if they can ask me a question. First of all, you already did. Can I ask you a question? Is a question. So you already answered your own question by already asking that question. Secondly, is anybody that big of a jerk that they respond with a no and then the conversation is done? Can I ask you a question? Absolutely not. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. If somebody were to respond like that, I believe it is safe to assume that this is the same person who doesn't change the toilet paper roll when there's only one piece of paper left on it. And trust me, you don't want their opinion anyway. And the third thing about this is I'm not good at checking my messages. So it usually takes me 4 days before I notice that I have one. So if you can ask me a question, then 4 days later I will tell you yes. But then you have to wait 4 days more after actually asking the question that you wanted to ask before I get a chance to respond to it again. I'm just not good at that. Other pet peeves? When somebody takes the last water bottle out of the fridge without putting another one in. How tough is that? When people drive very slowly until you get to a passing zone and then all of a sudden they're going 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. Are you serious? Little dogs that never stop barking. I mean, you are the size of a squirrel. Who do you think you're intimidating? Another pet peeve? My brother-in-law, Mark. Just in general. That's it. And whining. Whining is one of my pet peeves. Especially that whiny voice that goes along with it.
I want my hot dog from yesterday. You don't have to push my backpack. I'm already done. What? Done? Isabel only have to play once. No one said you could do that.
Oh dear, let's just stop it for a moment.
Oh man, that voice can make your blood boil in 4 seconds flat. You know, if you were able to come to church last week, then you probably know what whining reminds me of, because it's something that I talked about very briefly during our outdoor worship service. It reminds me of the Exodus Israelites. Last week I covered it pretty briefly, but today I want to dive into it a little bit deeper. When I talk about the Exodus Israelites, I'm talking about those who were slaves in Egypt that God set free. You see, Joseph brought his family to Egypt when he was the right-hand man under Pharaoh, and the Israelites prospered and they grew in number. Now, however, a couple hundred years have passed. Joseph is no more. The Pharaoh is no more. A new Pharaoh is in power, and the Israelites, well, they are no longer welcome guests, but instead have become the Egyptian slaves. And the life of an Egyptian slave, well, it wasn't a good one. Every day was filled with back-breaking labor for most of them. The Israelites made their own bricks and clay and were responsible for constructing all of Egypt's buildings. And you know how many impressive buildings they have still standing to this day. And those who weren't part of that labor workforce, they were instead personal slaves, catering to their master's every whim, because that's what a slave is for. As slaves, the Egyptians could treat them however they wished, and the Israelites couldn't say a single word of protest about it. Shortly before Moses was born, the Egyptians had actually decided that the Israelites were becoming too strong and too great in number. So the Israelite solution was to find and murder any child who was born a boy. The Egyptians killed the Israelites' children, and all the Israelites could do was stand by and watch. So for years, the Israelites called out to God, begging him to free them from the hands of the Egyptians. And God answered that prayer using Moses as his mouthpiece, and he demands that Pharaoh let his people go. Well, Pharaoh says no, so God sends a series of plagues down on the Egyptians. The Nile River turns into blood. Flies cover all of Egypt. Giant fiery hail. Lice crawling out of the ground. Frogs everywhere. Locusts. Total darkness where the Egyptians were, but not where the Israelites were. The death of the firstborn son of all Egyptians. And finally, with that last plague, Pharaoh agrees to free God's people. So God's people head off into the wilderness. They begin their march to freedom. However, they don't get too far when Pharaoh changes his mind and decides that he's going to go after them. Now, the Israelites have just watched God do miracle after miracle after miracle to free them. So when they spot the Egyptian army coming after them, you would expect them to be confident that God has a plan for this. He's got a miracle up his sleeve for just such an occasion. But listen to how they respond. After having all these miracles performed specifically for them, to free them, listen to how they respond to seeing the Egyptians coming, because it's not with hope or confidence like you might expect. Exodus 14:11 through 12. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done by bringing us out of Egypt? Did we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. Ugh, what is with the whining? So the Israelites whine. God once again saves them, however, by putting a pillar of fire between the Israelites and the Egyptians.
Fire! It is the breath of God!
And then through Moses, God parts the Red Sea for the Israelites to safely cross, and then closes the sea when the dumb Egyptians pursue. I mean, seriously, who sees a pillar of fire separating them? The fire disappears. Whoa, there's a wall of water on both sides that they just went through. Let's chase them. Let's chase them, because nothing bad could come out of this. How dumb do you have to be? So God closes the water down on the dumb Egyptians. So now the Israelites, they are finally and truly free, with no Egyptian army ever to bother them again. And God begins to lead them through the desert to this special land that he has promised them. So certainly now the Israelites will be grateful and happy for some time. I mean, he just took out the entire army of the people who had oppressed them, who had murdered their children, who were following them to take them back as slaves or just to kill them. Lord only knows. So you think, oh yeah, they'll finally be in a grateful, good, wonderful place. They'll be praising God for their newfound freedom and looking forward to the home that God is taking them to. That's what you think. Listen to Exodus 15:22, however. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. This is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" 3 days. They made it 3 whole days until they started to whine again. Not praise, not pray, not ask, just complain and whine. Now listen, when I talk negatively about people complaining and whining, I'm not talking about those times in our lives when we are going through a rough patch. I'm not talking about those moments when our emotions feel overwhelmed because of our situation. Jesus himself cried out to God in the Garden of Gethsemane over what he was about to face when he knew that his death on the cross was quickly approaching. You see, there are times in our lives when we need to call out to God and reach out to loved ones to gain strength enough to make it through this massive thing that we are facing. There is a big difference between being burdened and being whiny. Being burdened is having a lot on your plate. We all go through this in life for sure. Some of us are going through it right now. Whiny, however, that's completely different. Whiny is this.
Come on, get out of the bathtub. Come on. Let's go for a walk. Come on. I'm not turning on the water. Come on. Come on. Let's go for a walk. Come on. Zeus. Come on. Get out of the bathtub. Come on. Come on.
Yes. Whiny is that dog because it wanted a bath instead of going for a walk. How awful. How awful. There's a big difference between being burdened and being whiny. Whiny is the woe is me mentality when things aren't really woe. So I'm allowed to be burdened with my problems and share them. But I'm not supposed to be a whiny complainer. Is that what you're saying? Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Well, how do I know which is which? Well, maybe it would be helpful to look at the Exodus Israelites a couple more times to help us get a clearer picture, because they were whiny. They weren't burdened, they were whiny. I already told you about the first time they whined, which was 3 days after a huge miracle. So the first thing that you have to remember, one of the characteristics of being whiny and being a whiny Christian is whiny Christians do not trust God. If you are complaining to other people more than you are praying to God and asking for his help to solve the situation, then you may be a whiny Christian. I feel like Jeff Foxworthy now. You might be a whiny Christian. Yeah, the Israelites whine about water in the end of Exodus 15. And then listen to them in the beginning of Exodus 16. Exodus 16:3. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Okay, so first it was water, and now it's food. Once again, the same exact thing, though, not trusting God, or not even asking for his help, not praying. No, not praying, just complaining. Complaining instead. Why? Well, that's because whiny Christians make big deals out of little things. You see, God parted the Red Sea, and he drowned the army that was chasing you. That is a pretty big deal. Compared to an entire army about to murder you, being kind of hungry, well, that's like this.
Hum-dum-dee-dum, hum-dum-dee-dum, I'm so rumbly in my tumbly. Ooh. Time to munch an early lunch and hum-dee-dum-dum-dum.
There's the rumbly in my tumbly. Yes, let's get some perspective here, okay? If you want to know if you are being a whiny Christian, then ask yourself if what you are complaining about is really worth the amount of effort that you are putting into complaining. If you are complaining over things that do not really matter, then you might be a whiny Christian. So God provides the Israelites with manna. They complain they got nothing to eat, so he gives them manna. And every day, all they have to do is go outside, and in the morning, laying all over the ground is manna. And I kind of picture it like a box of instant mashed potato flakes that you can gather up and then make all kinds of stuff out of. So no planting, no tilling, no hunting, no toiling, no nothing. Just walking out your door and picking it up. You can't complain about that, right? I mean, it doesn't get any easier than that. So there's nothing to complain about, right? Wrong. Whiny Christians are ungrateful for what they have been given. Whiny Christians are ungrateful for what they have been given. Listen to, these are still the Exodus Israelites. We're now in Numbers, though, which kind of parallels the story of the Exodus. Numbers 11, 4 through 6. The rabble with them began to crave other food. And again, the Israelites started wailing and said, "If only we had meat to eat. Remember the fish we ate in Egypt at no cost? Also the cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlics. But now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna." Are you serious? You complained about being hungry, and now you're complaining about not having enough variety in your free food that you're being provided with every day. Man, God had to be like slapping his head like, oh my, I can't even believe this. Are you serious? Listen, if you find yourself complaining about the blessing that you have been given, then you might be a whiny Christian. But guess what? That wouldn't be the last time that he'd slap his head over the Israelites. Why? Because whiny Christians get stuck in a negative cycle. Listen to Exodus chapter 17. But the people were thirsty for water there, and they grumbled against Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to make us and our children and our livestock die of thirst?" Did we not already cover this one earlier? Didn't we already talk about this? You were thirsty, and what happened? God provided water. Why are we back at this complaint all over again? Have we learned nothing? No, we haven't, because whiny Christians get stuck in a cycle of complaining. And the circle, it just keeps going and going and going. That's what a cycle does. And it's natural, very natural for us to be on this cycle, to find ourselves on this circle. Because as a society, this negativity, this whining, this complaining, well, that's absolutely what is expected. It reminds me of the story of Goldilocks, who gets lost in the woods. She's lost, she's scared, she's hungry, and she stumbles upon a house that has 3 bears living in it, who just happen to leave some porridge on the table. What are the chances? And Goldilocks is famished, so she samples some of the porridge. But when she takes a bite of the first bowl, what does she say? "This porridge is too hot." She is lost in the woods, manages to find a house owned by some magical bears. These magical bears have just left some food sitting on a table, just waiting for her to eat. And she complains about the temperature of the soup. Yeah, that's us. That is us. If you choose to be whiny, there will always be something to complain about. You hear me? There will always be something to complain about. But what happened to the Israelites who picked this life, who chose this life of a whiner? Well, as a direct result of their whining, they were forced to wander in the desert for 40 years, and they completely missed the blessing that God had lined up for them. Folks, every single day we are missing God's blessings because instead of being grateful Christians, We choose to be whiny Christians. We choose to be Goldilocks, complaining about the temperature of the soup and completely missing the house full of magical bears. So I ask you today, are you stuck on the cycle of whininess? Do you really want to wander in the desert for 40 years, whining about the same things over and over and over again? If the answer is no, then let's kick this habit, this awful habit that society has and that we've fallen in the trap of. Let us kick it to the curb, and instead, let us start to praise God for the blessings that we have in our life, big and small, instead of spending all of our time whining about the little things. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care and God bless.